Okay, so first to highlight that all the poneglyphs are a trap, we only really have like 5 to look at, and we only need to really look at those 5 because each one of them kind of have some huge glaring similarities. Thematically and story-wise, just in every way, they directly relate to each other. But I guarantee it's probably not in the way you're thinking, and that's what we're going to get into in this video, and to kind of show how the poneglyphs are one of Oda's biggest traps. Now, the first time we actually see a poneglyph is in chapter 202. It's called the Royal Mausoleum. So that means a grave site or a tomb. So for one, the idea that these poneglyphs are kept inside of a tomb or some sort of a grave, I think is important to note. But we're going to come back to this chapter 202. We're going to look at chapter 203 first. So for one, during this entire sequence, we know that Cobra is probably hiding information. I think he might know a lot more than what we think, and just a subtle clue to that is during this entire chapters, his hands are crossed behind his back, almost like his fingers are crossed, like he's telling a lie. But whatever, that's a little bit fringy. But this entire chapter 203 deals with betrayal on every single page. I mean, it's really kind of crazy. Starting with the very first thing that's said in the chapter is quite a national secret you have here. So the idea of a whole nation, a whole country and kingdom keeping secrets, that's number 1. Number 2, Robin immediately lies about what the poneglyph says. But not only that, she never intended to give the information on Pluton to Crocodile. So from the very beginning, she was planning on betraying him. Which is kind of okay because we learn in this same chapter that Crocodile has never trusted anyone and that he was expecting to betray them as well, or to betray her as well. Then we hear Crocodile talk about his plans that he's had for a while to destroy the city no matter what anyway. But to top it all off, this tomb that for all we know could have been made to specifically house, it seems like it was made to specifically house this poneglyph. King Cobra pulls one little pillar from the wall, and the entire chamber is designed to collapse on whoever is in there. So to me, that's kind of a huge clue that the whole thing was kind of designed to be a trap for whoever could read it. But I would argue that looking at it, it almost seems like if you could read the poneglyph, it was maybe designed to not collapse over there and just collapse on the people that couldn't read it outside, maybe, or couldn't hear what it was saying outside. And then I think, just to kind of hammer home this point, the next person we see in the chapter is Vivi, who joined Baroque Works with the intention of betraying them for her kingdom. And then we see Usopp next. And then, like, just because Oda gets, like, crazy obvious with these clues, I think, sometimes, the next Straw Hat we see is Nami. And Nami joined the crew originally with the idea to betray him as well. So all in all, this is all just a big trap clue to me. And so just to reiterate, basically the first chapter we ever see a poneglyph, we get 6 straight betrayals in a row, and then a liar. So moving on to the next poneglyph. Then the next main poneglyph we see is the one that they're keeping in the Golden City up in Shandora. And that one, to me, is interesting because just on a base level, the whole story is kind of about, the idea of El Dorado, and then the Viz translation uses the term El Dorado, and that's a real life kind of lie or myth or however you want to view it. But in this sense, it's kind of just like it could be construed as a big, fool's errand. But just the idea that the entire arc was about, kind of centered around a liar and being deceived and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately in the storyline, this place of great treasure and vast wealth that Nolan found, when he tried to show other people it eventually led to his death. So this idea of it almost being a trap with all the ramifications equaling a trap, whether it was meant to be or not to be, I think that could be part of the whole point here. Then jumping ahead a little bit to Big Mom's arc and the whole Cake Island and everything, that entire arc was around the idea of falsely leading someone down the aisle and lying and tricking and deceiving and backstabbing and betraying. All of those things were present during that arc. And then right before that one, we had the road poneglyph that they find in Zo in the whale tree, which for some reason gives Luffy and Roger and Odin bad vibes when they hear it. That entire, it's for a good reason. It's for something we want for the main characters. It's to help them out. That entire thing was about a nation keeping a lie as well. And they were all animals, which I think is important. Going back to Alabasta, which all the chapter titles seem to indicate was the Animal Kingdom, or more specifically, according to the Viz translation, Alabasta Animal Land. Which also actually, that chapter 203, the very next chapter, 204, is just titled Red, which makes me think of a lot of things, but, you know, in this case, the Red Road, Rio Poneglyphs, whatever. And I kind of think this is enough proof to go off of for the idea that it's a trap and move on. But the last one I want to touch on is kind of a speculative poneglyph, and it's that one that they kind of maybe might be in Impel Down. And that chapter I want to touch on because I actually think that it is at least supposed to replicate a poneglyph. Whether it is or isn't, I think it's supposed to replicate one. And that chapter with the Impel Down thing, now they find that poneglyph on the level 3 hell. But Luffy meets a Sphinx on level 2. Now these Sphinxes are the exact same things that live on Sphinx Island, Whitebeard's island that Marco's been on in the New World. Which the Sphinx Luffy calls a lion, and then he actually calls it an old man. He corrects himself. And I think one of the things is that Luffy can kind of see through mirages and see what things really are in some messed up fashion. So he thinks that this is an old man, this Sphinx, but then somehow he takes control of it by grabbing onto its hair, and they fall through to the burning hell. Now, firstly, to tie back into this idea of lies and betrayal, the chapter starts off with Sengoku learning of Kuma's betrayal at Sabaody, and that Garp is loving it, it's hilarious, and that was a lie, it was a whole big thing. So that's how the chapter starts. Then we meet the Sphinx and everyone's knocked out in the burning hell, and Luffy mentions how it's so hot, but it's also so quiet. Now, just straight up, I think there's a whole lot of things about wishing wells and wishing stuff and all these things. And the moment that they get down here, where everyone is starving and everyone is trying, waiting to eat, somehow a bird that is barbecued and ready to eat falls from the sky and lands in front of Luffy for him to eat. That's one weird thing that happens. But also, I kind of think that this is the highlight, if this is a poneglyph, how the voices and the people and the dreams and the wishes of all these prisoners are getting held in these gated bars, and looking out of them, it's almost like maybe the poneglyphs are looking out, into the real world or something crazy like that. This poneglyph is what really kind of made me start realizing the big weird trap things, because when we look at this setup, someone's supposed to be crucified in the middle, and if you go to help them, you get killed by that dropping bar thing with the spikes on it. And if you go with the prisoners and talk to them, you get killed by the dropping spikes. But if you try to stand in the middle there, and if you try to actually read the poneglyph, then a net pops out and grabs you. Because this net, I even checked in the anime, is built underground. This net was not made there right now since Luffy has invaded Impel Down. This net is there and designed. If you try to help a pirate, if you try to help one of your friends escape, it'll just kill you, it doesn't need you. But if it sees someone who knows what a poneglyph is and tries to read it, to me, it then wants to capture them. Just like in that Alabasta one, where that whole thing seemed to be designed to catch someone who could read or hear or listen or interpret the poneglyphs. And then I said kind of weird stuff with wishes, which I'll touch on in future videos. But they get captured in this net, which we know is made of sea stone or coated in sea stone, all that stuff. And then Luffy tries to chew through it, and he can't. And he says, these ropes are made of iron. Well, that really shouldn't matter, because I can think of 2 instances where I've seen Luffy chew through iron bars, no problem with his teeth. But I will say that every single thing inside the net could be considered touching. They're touching Buggy, they're touching Mr. 3, the birthday candle, they're touching Luffy, and they're touching the Sphinx thing. So all of them wanting to get out of this net, I think plays a role in the fact that for some reason this sea prism net, that for all we know should really not be able to be cut through, is easily cut through by the Sphinx. Which, like, just looking at it using my eyes and ears and all the stuff in the story, this Sphinx creature having strong enough teeth or talons or whatever to cut through or bite through this net seems to be a huge whole in the idea that these are indestructible, but also just the idea that they can easily be chiseled and kind of means that to me. But some creature in this world can, it seems like, either scratch or chew these poneglyph things. So that seems kind of, seems like an overlooked detail to me. And I'll say it for the rest of, for all time. I think for Oda, his All Blue is combining every single interesting thing that he's found and seen in his entire life into one huge story. And that includes real-world, huge mystery things. And the idea of the riddle of the Sphinx, I think, is a huge, huge, huge thing that he's touching on here. And this idea especially seems to be relevant with the idea that with the riddle of the Sphinx, if you answered it correctly, you got to be the king of Thebes. So this idea that in the One Piece world, maybe someone answered it correctly in the past and is now the king or queen of the world, makes me think of something like that. Or that's being set up for something. But just that kind of idea, I feel like has to be touched on somewhere. And maybe it will be touched on here. But that, I think, might be more of an ultimate thing. I think that the poneglyphs themselves don't so much have anything to do with that. When it comes to the poneglyphs in particular, what comes to my mind is a wild goose chase. And this idea, even just the base idea that there could be one written text that could sum up the complexities and entirety of all of history, it's a fool's dream. Even in the One Piece world, with how complicated it is, do you really think that we're going to read, one page of text and it's going to tell us all the answers? I think we're constantly supposed to question the easy answers we're given and really look a lot deeper into, what he's actually showing us and telling us in the pages, which is what we're going to actually get into after, in the tinfoil part at the end of this video. Now, just real quick to look at those new Road to Laugh Tale things, I think they're all BS, and I think they're all intentional to throw us off and all these things, and especially that newest one that has the three possible locations. So it could be at Elbaf, it could be at 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚢𝚛 Island, and it could be at this Vera place. Okay, so Vera, I think, is something totally different, but we're going to throw that out because most great stories kind of show you something like a Chekhov's gun, and then they go back to it as like oh, you should have known, like, dope. But I think the idea that we've probably been to the island before, or at least seen it in some way and didn't know in some fashion, I think could be happening here. So, but the idea that it's on Elbaf kind of bothers me because this entire idea that Shanks was, has this history and all this stuff. Why would he ever think that Luffy was a suitable inheritor of the idea of learning the world's history? He might be the dumbest person in the entire One Piece world. Why? What about him would ever make Shanks think that he would ever learn or have interest in finding the true history of the world and the poneglyphs to me? And if it was such a big deal to that too, truthfully, I feel like Roger would have mentioned it as execution, which he didn't mention the poneglyphs. He just mentioned the One Piece treasure where they all lead. So I guess you could argue that maybe you need to have that to find it, but whatever. But if Shanks had it, one, that means that he's really done nothing for a bunch of years, but two, if he has it, that means that his plan banked on Robin joining the Straw Hat Pirates, which I don't think is totally out of the realm of possibilities, but I just think it's a lot to ask here, especially with Shanks and Luffy's relationship. That was not a requirement of meeting Shanks. Meeting back up with Shanks for Luffy, the poneglyphs were not required to do that, so take that for what it's worth. Now, this idea that it could be on 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚢𝚛 Island or whatever, the Beehive Island, the full of holes, full of lead island with Blackbeard, I feel like he would just have. I feel like I think Whitebeard has it or whatever, took it, but he would already have a scribe of it or whatever they call it with the taking a tracing of it, and he wouldn't need to have the actual poneglyph there. So, and I think he already knows maybe the purpose of all this stuff and maybe where it's leading. He just, for whatever reason, it's just not time to do it yet, but I think that he doesn't need to have the poneglyph. So all three places that are mentioned in that new book, I think, are totally false clues and red herrings or whatever. And Especially, I mean, this one really kind of highlighted a bunch of stuff to me that I think are just next level, because I don't think Whitebeard was that great of a father, considering that, you know, his children were killing each other and all this stuff. And I'll get into it later in the video, but this idea that is kind of hinted and highlighted with Roger, when you really think about it, is he pretty much knew he was going to die, knew it was too early for all this stuff that all of his dreams to accomplish. For all we know, somehow he forced himself, and I'm just saying, he forced himself to have a kid somehow, and hoped that he would become the Pirate King and inherit all of his dreams and wishes and stuff like that. And I think that's highlighted. It's like the idea of him viewing Ace as a tool. And I say that because he's not known as a swordsman. So for him, he's viewing a saber and a sword, I think, fundamentally different than Zoro does or samurais would. To him, a sword is just a tool. And I think that is extremely highlighted in this information that Roger's sword was named Ace. Because I think a big part of this whole thing, and we'll get to it in the tinfoil part a little bit, but I think that Roger made a wish at Laugh Tale, and that was to be reborn. And the idea of maybe him coming back in a vessel, you know, later on, I think is what might be getting hinted at here. But I don't want to sound too crazy this early in the video, so we'll just move on to what we do know. But let's look into the idea of what exactly Whitebeard was. Because if I told you exactly what I think he was or is, and how exactly Edward Weevil is related to him, and how all these things connect with him, I don't think you'd believe me right now. So let's just start with what we do know about Whitebeard and his crew, because it kind of seems really murky. For a guy that was all about family, he really seemed to be about not, keeping hard borders and not leaving where you're from, which is what he says in the Odin flashback. One weird thing. We know from Blackbeard, see, it's always kind of bothered me with Blackbeard, if he really, really wanted that fruit so much, do you think if Sanji found a fruit that Usopp really, really wanted, keep in mind, maybe not the invisibility fruit, but if he found a fruit that he wanted, I think he would just give it to him if he asked him for it and had sound reasoning. And so it's always kind of, you've been on this crew for 20 years or however long together, and Blackbeard couldn't even ask this friend that he liked, can I have that fruit instead of you? Just makes me think that there must be some kind of a rule against that. Maybe a rule against sharing food. Kind of makes me think of like Oliver Twist, may I have another, sir, please, all that stuff. Which I think might be relevant because when you really look at Edward Newgate's name, the name Newgate, the only thing it really meant was kind of the world's biggest prison for 700 years. And as much as Whitebeard is the strongest man in the world and all these things, he was really just kind of thematically and all these things, just kind of the lid on the first half of the story. It was almost like the paradise part of the Grand Line was its own sort of prison holding in the story until we got to a certain point. I think that's one way we can look at it. But I think on a fundamental level, it seemed like nothing, from the time Roger died and started the Age of Pirates and all that stuff, really nothing has fundamentally changed about the One Piece world until Whitebeard's death. I think that is an extremely big clue, for one. Like he was almost holding it up. And going back to this idea of betrayal, whatever happened to God Valley, which we know very little about, but whatever happened there, one thing we do know is that Whitebeard switched sides. And that there was that to me constitutes some idea of a betrayal on some level, no matter what the circumstances are. And so I brought up the food because right when Whitebeard dies, Brownbeard immediately tries to take over one of his kingdoms called Food Vaulton. So the Food Vault, he tries to take over that kingdom for some reason. And the only other territory we super know about with Whitebeard, aside from Sphinx Island, is Fishman Island. And, I wonder what kind of food he was getting as tribute. And I say that kind of jokingly, but Big Mom was protecting it in order to get, saltwater taffy. Once Luffy took over the territory, whether it was intentional or not, he ate the payment that was meant for Big Mom, causing her to, want to go back and destroy and you know, dissolve their deal. So even Luffy, who we know as the hero and as the main character, was technically paid candy and food for saving it. So, and with the idea of the only other kingdom we really know it with Whitebeard is being this, you know, called Food Vaulton, and then the only other thing we know is with the Blackbeard and the not sharing food thing. So everything seems to be related to food with Blackbeard and his crew. And I mentioned that, again, going back to that Sphinx thing, because every single thing that the Sphinx seems to do and say and all these things, it's hungry. The whole time it's hungry. And these sphinxes are seen on Sphinx Island. It's what it's the animal that he's tending to when we see him and Inarashi on the island. So this idea of maybe something, something living there, maybe a dragon, maybe a sphinx, but maybe even something that wants to eat the Poneglyphs, I don't think is out of the realm of possibilities. But I don't think that's totally it. But I do think that there is something going on with having to send food back to Sphinx Island. And that leads me to the big part of this video is, where is that last road Poneglyph? Well, it was taken from Fishman Island, which we know became Whitebeard's territory, and it was moved to Sphinx Island, I think. Now, I think that this was all actually through the world government, and it was for the world government and all these things, but I'll have to do a future video kind of touching more on that, because I think that's just one aspect of it. I don't think that they know what Pandora's box they're unlocking with the Poneglyphs and trying to use them. But I think that they are trying to lead, huge catches and feeds and fish and huge dreamers to, certain locations. And I think that Sphinx Island is where I think that the world government / Whitebeard is trying to take advantage of this thing that might be coming out or doing. And so, because kind of relating back to, not back to, I did the video already, but it's not coming out till tomorrow, but this being Saki and idea of Brook and all these things is I think that someone is trying to lead a group of basically shadows to fill up the body of a warrior. And this ancient warrior animal thing, it might be a sphinx, it might be Pandaman, it might be one of those things. Something we saw in the recent Kaido flashback is that Rox's ship, and it has has 2 levels of cannons on the side and all this stuff. And I think the idea of maybe shadows or powerful spirits or wishes filling up a warship or a worship type wordplay and deal and clues, I think all that stuff is also being hinted at with everything we've gotten and talked about too. I think at a base level, it's some sort of a spirit or huge power source maybe looking for a new body. And that, I think, directly ties to Whitebeard. I think everything about Whitebeard is very, very weird, including his name, including all that stuff. But not only does, this idea of just recently touched on that victors need no epithet, and for some reason his name is not Edward Newgate, it's Whitebeard, and he doesn't even have a beard. He has a mustache. All these things about him just point to me being lies. Even going, there's lots of things I think where Oda hides stuff in plain sight, and we just, if it's not online, you get to actually just read the volume, and the things you're meant to overlook. Like in volume 57, the opening volume picture is this era is Whitebeard, and it's Luffy pulling back a curtain. And this idea that he's just, not what we think he is, I ultimately, I think, is just totally, what he's doing. And it starts with just this, it not just starts, but it goes along with all this idea of betraying, and all these things we know about him just don't really seem to totally make sense. But this idea that he was an old guy, for whatever reason, we know he was on tons of medication to try to prolong his life and keep living, all that stuff. And then he seems to, like I said, he doesn't seem like he shares food or treasure. Everyone has their own stuff, but he commands and makes his kids follow his orders and fulfill his dreams and do all these things. Just to me, it's a very clear, obvious kind of thematic clue of this idea of parents who put all their failed hopes and dreams on their children. I think is kind of what's being touched on here, and we see that because once he's gone, he hasn't been a good father, because the Whitebeard pirates cannot function without their father. A good father raises their, good father and mother, whatever, raises their kids to be able to function on their own. And the Whitebeard pirates have not been able to do that. But I will say that the Phoenix, Marco, who Marco Polo, but the game Polo, hitting balls to certain targets and locations, I think is what Marco is here to do for the Straw Hats, to divert them from where we think they're going to be going next with Elbaf or wherever, to be diverted to go to Sphinx Island for this trap. And this trap is what the tinfoil part of this video is going to be about. There's a lot of actual proof to that. And for the proof, that's why I say that for this part of the video, this is where we're going to get tinfoily. And when I say tinfoily, I mean all we're doing is going to be trying to get on Oda's level. Now, ultimately, I think that what might be happening is just the basic premise of loading a cannonball into a cannon and readying it to fire. And the ball and cannon and all these things take many, many shapes. But overall, I'll get into it in a future video, but Oda has all these dreams from when he was a kid that were, either crushed or fulfilled or whatever. But the main one is that he wanted Pandaman to be in Shonen Jump. And he submitted it to an Ultimate Muscle contest, and he was denied. It was deemed, when he was a kid, he was basically told, this character that you created and you like is not good enough to be in Shonen Jump. And like the Kurozumis, he's pretty much been on a revenge tour since then, and he's brought a lot of positive things from that. But one of the core things with this is I think that the Pandaman is a big deal with the story. And I know it's a joke character and it's all these things, and that's kind of the point. It's supposed to be so stupid that we don't realize what it is. Because Pandemonium and Ragnarok are basically the same meaning. Pandora and Pandaman, same letters and movements, all these crazy things you can do. But, so, there's confirmation from Oda that the very first Poneglyph that he's ever drawn writes Pandaman in kanji. Okay? Now, what's absolutely insane about that chapter is that the SBS for that chapter 202, the very first question talks about finding Pandaman, and it relates to volume 20, page 60 in the first panel. Now, it takes you to chapter 179. Now, I mentioned getting on Oda's level because he is like Loki. He constantly lies and he's always lying. Well, that SBS for chapter 179, when the second question asks for Oda's home address, okay? And he says, the only thing he says is the first part of his zip code, 202. So we're right back to the Pandaman chapter and the first chapter we see the Poneglyph. Right back to chapter 202, right connecting them. Now when we actually look at Pandaman in this chapter, there's only one of them, and he is carrying a big knapsack and he's running. Now the guy in the foreframe has the same exact hat from chapter 1 with this weird spiral devil fruit looking design and all that stuff. But if you look through the light, keeping in mind that a manga page is printed on both sides and that if you look through the light you can see through both sides of them, it looks like he's kind of loaded up into a cannon right there. So that's kind of one thing. But, and I get that the looking through the light can be kind of crazy, and I've been told that maybe that's a form of magic, which if it is, I'm pretty, I guess, not so disappointed that I wasn't invited to go to Hogwarts, if that's really all it is. But throw out the light stuff. If you just have where the page where the Pandaman says on the SBS, it directly touches and writes over the spot where the kanji writes Pandaman, the Poneglyph. So, all these things, Oda's working on multiple levels and having things touch and connect and all these things, including, like, just looking at Robin's head on that first time we see the Poneglyph, it just looks like a rope the whole time with her hat. And it's like, you're getting lead and all these, crazy things about, just like in the logo with the bit and tie in his mouth with the rope. It's all these things, to me, getting led to a mouth. The logo has the clue right there. But when we actually look at the question in the SBS, it asks, where does the Pandaman live? And does the Pandaman like to travel? And Oda says that there are rumors that he's a very important person, at least on some islands, okay? So on some islands, he's worshipped. Now, I think the idea of him maybe being the king of the jungle in some form might be what is being talked about here. And that's another tying back to Sphinx Island. We know Marco, the Phoenix. We get Inarashi, the cat guy. And we see the old man sphinxes, and then we meet one girl. And then just more of the craziness with that chapter 179 SBS is he even talks about being Ding Dong Ditch, and the main idea of there being a ding or a bell or a ring for belief is something I think it was hugely touched on with Nolan and the Skypiea stuff. But there's a lot of rough truths that are coming from the story, and I think they're going to be coming really very, very quickly. Like things like our concept of the One Piece not existing, and things like huge betrayals and misplacements of trust, and things that I touch on my 𝚘𝚙𝚒𝚑𝚝 video, which please check out. It comes out tomorrow. But just this idea that maybe everything in the One Piece world is not so clear cut or given to us, so piecemeal and all these things. I think there's lots of tricks going on, and this is just it is definitely one of the bigger ones. But this is going back to the Whitebeard idea, this idea that he knows everything and maybe he just didn't do anything because he was too old. So he wants a new vessel for a body. Whatever it is, whatever all these things are, the idea that he had the strongest devil fruit, was labeled the strongest man. He had all these labels and all these things that the story tells us are these great things or whatever, when just simple solutions like that, where I don't think we're getting the full stories and everything. But I definitely think, though, that Whitebeard is kind of a main key to all this stuff, and it does kind of stem from just this idea that I think that he might be a cyborg / robot for the Marines ultimately. We saw him lose a chunk of his head and keep going. Reminded me of a lot like Don Craig, who just kept fighting and fighting and fighting until he was literally shut down, who I also think has some huge hints to maybe donning a mask and not really being all he's cracked up to be. But this idea of pacifistas and robots and all these things, I think we already see them in the story. We think it's obvious, but I think this idea that there's a lot of, body snatchers and invaders and all these things are super relevant in the story. And I think this is one of them. And going back to the idea of maybe shadows or buggies, I think Buggy plays a huge part. I think actually that his nose might be a devil fruit or a philosopher's stone or something crazy like that. But I think it's supposed to be eaten by someone. And I think that's going to be an extremely scary moment when whoever eats Buggy's nose, whatever moment that is. But it relates back to this idea of Chopper, where Chopper wants to be a doctor, he wants to save people, he wants to help all these things, but when he takes these drugs that influence his body, he goes out of control. And I think that is what might be on the horizon for a lot of characters and things, and this idea of transforming into a monster and being out of control is what, in part, I think is what might be coming. But all of that stuff, I don't want to sound too tinfoily, but I think it's it's all about to happen. It's all coming, I think, very, very soon. Now, just to end the video on something, if you've watched this long, thank you very much. Please like and subscribe. My name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚒𝚝. I have a manga you can check out. I have a video dropping tomorrow, kind of dismantling 𝚘𝚙𝚒𝚑𝚝. But to end this video, I kind of want to get really crazy and reward you with something that you probably have never heard before, but I think kind of makes sense with what we've kind of we talked about this whole thing. Now, we know Brook I think Brook is basically whatever our conception of what Rocks could be if he was lurking around somewhere. I think Brook is a huge aspect to that. It's in his name. It's in Brook. It's all these things, and I think that him maybe being the king of dreams could be a very real possibility. But I think Oda plays around all the time, and I think with those newest Road to Laugh Tale things, he's really played around a lot with this idea that could Rock's designs still be around. And I think lots of characters are bits and pieces of other things, and particular things in their designs are, I think, part of, like, they'll be taken like a fusion to other parts maybe. And this idea that the skeletal structure might be Brook, and then other things, his eyelashes might be from, Nami, and his bangs might be from Robin, and all these crazy things I think are not super out of the realm of, the wordplay that he's doing. But I think that could be, that's kind of on the, wilder end of the ideas. But at the very least, I do think that Brook is rocks more than we think, you know, anyone else is, even probably Blackbeard, all this stuff. And I think that when his crew was split up at this last wishing stone or wishing well, whatever, I think that he entrusted bits of himself to different pieces of all these things, and they've been, with whether they know it or not, through whatever machinations the entire universe does to make them do these things, they've kind of completed these goals he had. And I think that's why Brook was the one to get the Poneglyph tracing in Big Mom's territory, because that was honestly probably the only one that he didn't have at the time for some reason. But for some reason he needs that now, and I guess too much to go into here, but you know, let me know what you think in the comments. You know, please like and subscribe, share the video if you liked it. If you didn't, you know, comment what your ideas are. I'd love to hear them. You know, thank you for watching all this stuff, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.